appreciate how significant that is in this chapter. I've got it written if I can find it right quick. Isaac's love for Esau's wild game recipe is mentioned in verse 4, in verse 7, in verse 9, in verse 14, in verse 19, and verse 25. So what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in this chapter. So this plays a fairly significant role in what happens. So he wants Esau to go hunting and to smoke him some deer meat or whatever it is that he is making. I'm not sure how telling that is about Isaac. We already know what's the relationship between Isaac and Esau. Yeah, Esau's his favorite. Okay, and I think because of things like this, he's a man of the field. He likes to go hunting. You know, if there was water anywhere around, I'm sure he'd like to go fishing. He loves to be outside. He roams the mountains. He is a kind of a manly man type guy. Whereas Jacob is presented in a different way, and Isaac very much is affectionate toward Esau. So here's the real question. What is it that Isaac has in mind here? Says he wants to bless him before what? Before he dies. So we're not just talking about, hey, go smoke me a brisket because I really love your cooking and how you fix it, your wild game. So we can sit down and have an enjoyable meal together. There's much more going on here. And I will be the first to acknowledge that I don't have a great appreciation, and I've yet to find a really good, full explanation for this blessing of the patriarch upon his children as he is facing his death. But that's what's happening here. Isaac thinks he's about to die. And so he is going to confer blessing. We see this with Abraham, we see it with Isaac, we see it with Jacob and all of his sons. We see it with Joseph. We're going to see it with Moses. We're going to see it with Joshua. This kind of last charge that you see on the part of God's great leaders on a national level is in some ways a kind of a extended patriarchal blessing of the father upon the children. And some of them are very interesting. They do take the form of prophecy. You really see that with Jacob's blessing of his 12 sons as we get very late into this chapter, into this study, and how he designates how certain of them are going to be in their life and the future that is coming. And so let me propose to you that there is in some ways a kind of a divine prophecy that's taking place here. You see it in part because it takes the form of almost poetry. And so I want to propose to you that at least in the biblical iteration of family, father blessing upon children, that God is involved in this process. Okay, this is more than just, hey, I'm going to convey on you my best wishes. Okay, there's just much more going on here. Let me also note something about age here. This is fascinating to me. In fact, I have read this and read this and read this from different scholars, and I still have a hard time with it. Isaac is anticipating his death. Okay? Look at the first couple of verses. Actually, the first verse. Came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so he could not see. Verse 2, behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Therefore. So he's thinking he may well die at any time. And so that raises the question, how old is everybody when this takes place? And I want you to think about it because it's fascinating to me. So how old do you think Isaac may well be at this point? Has anybody looked at this at all? 137. Why, Larry, do you come up with that number? Actually, 137 is fairly commonly proposed date for Isaac at this point. And let me tell you how people come up with that number right there. They go to Jacob's death. Go to the very end of the book. We know how old Jacob was when he died. We know how old he was when he went down into Egypt. We know how old Joseph was at that point. And so they start backing up, looking at dates that God has offered, especially in the life of Jacob and Joseph, and they come up with essentially 137, and that's also tied to the fact that Ishmael dies at 137. Okay, now he has to be 100. How do we know that? How old was he when he and Rebekah married? How long was it before they had children? Okay, so we're at 60, and then how old is Ishmael when he marries his two Hittite wives? 40, very end of the last chapter. So if this is happening after Ishmael's married, and it seems very clear at the end of the chapter that it does, Isaac's at least 100. So let's just say for argument's sake, he lives to be 180. We'll find out several chapters later. Let's just say for argument's sake, he's somewhere between 100 and 125 or 30 or 37, which I think is reasonable. Now here's the fascinating part. How old are Jacob and Esau when this takes place? I mean, if you never thought about their ages, if you weren't going down the rabbit hole that we're going down right now, and you read about Jacob and Esau and the deceit and the stealing of the blessing, how old would you have thought Jacob and Esau to be? Huh? What, Chris?
I would have thought they were a lot younger.
Yeah, a lot younger. Okay, they're at least 40 if Isaac is on up, a good bit older than that. The proposition, if you go back to the Jacob chronology, is that Jacob at this point is 77 years old. Now, do you see a 77-year-old man doing what he's doing here? And I mention that because it lends a whole different perspective to me to what's going on here. Okay, this is not young men like we very often think of Jacob and Esau, or I think of Cain and Abel, and they're arguing as young people do. Joseph later on, he's 17 when he starts telling his brothers about his dreams, and they're like, get this kid out of here. These are grown men. In fact, these are old men, the way we look at it. So, what is it that Isaac intends to do? He's going to convey a blessing on Esau. Why? He's the oldest. But what do we already know? And the question then is, what may Jacob have known? I mean, what may Isaac have known? What did God tell Rebekah before these boys were born? The younger would be the one who would rule. And what's already happened in their life? What's already taken place between Jacob and Esau? Esau has already sold the birthright. Tracy said taken. And you may look at that and go, Jacob was all complicit in conniving this away, and he may well have done so. But Esau, we are told repeatedly, he didn't really care too much about it. So now here we are, and Isaac's about to die, and there's not only the birthright, but there is the blessing of the father. Who's got the birthright? Jacob. Do you think Isaac knew that? It's hard for me to think that that's not a known thing in the family. Okay, now I'm not saying it is. Maybe the boys hid it, but I mean, if Isaac and Esau are close, and I'm Esau, buddy, I'm griping about that. I mean, I'll gripe about pretty much anything. But I'm really griping to Daddy about the younger brother and what's happened. If all that speculation is true, and I recognize it's speculation, but it may well explain a lot of what happens here. What is Isaac really trying to do here? What? Yeah, he's trying to, Tracy said, level the playing field. He's trying to change God's plan. You ever thought about it from that perspective? Why is he trying to give the blessing to the older brother if he knows the younger brother, God has already said, is going to be the one who is the dominant one, and he's already got the birthright? Don't you think that Isaac's savvy enough to realize God's going to use Jacob to bring about his plans? That's not a big leap to draw that conclusion, is it? Shake your head no. Okay. But because he loves Esau, I want to propose to you at least this possibility, because to me, the whole chapter changes if you look at it from this possibility. That Isaac and Esau are conniving how they can go about making sure that Esau is the patriarch in the next generation. And that would explain, or at least it does to me, a number of things that go on in this chapter. So I want to plant that possibility in your mind. I'm not saying it's the only possibility, but it makes sense to me as to why you see things play out the way they play out. Dennis, you want to say something?
Having grown up in a family where the firstborn is traced with everything. Okay. And I wasn't the firstborn. But in all seriousness.
You never really get over that, do you, Dennis?
But they're special.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about Isaac being old, maybe being a little senile. And he loves Esau. He wants to keep that tradition.
Well, and it may be tradition. It may just be that he liked him better. Okay? We already know that that's true. Andrew, you want to say something? Are you going to argue here? Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. So, yes. No, go ahead.
Now, the thing is, the birthright is a blessing. The physical blessing, being rich, having all the flocks, that's what he's trying to give him.
No, I agree.
He's worried about his son being the minor factor in the family, but if he's got all the wealth, then it really doesn't matter if his brother is going to be the caretaker of God's people.
Yeah. But those two things still go together for these people. The birthright and the blessing go together. It would be exceptionally unusual for one to have one thing, and especially for the younger to have something else. And I tell you, you see that played out biblically. Jacob himself is going to bless the younger of Joseph's children as the preeminent one. And indeed, that's the way it plays out. Ephraim turns out to be a much more influential tribe than Manasseh ever would. And you also see it in the story of the prodigal son. Okay? The younger one demands what goes to him, but he has to leave home. He doesn't stay and inherit all the flocks. Okay? And so you see this tradition borne out in the customs that you read about scripturally. And I just want you to recognize at least the possibility of what's happening. It is very clear, and I think Andrew's right, he is trying to make sure that Esau receives maybe even the lion's share, the inheritance that would go to the firstborn, even though the birthright's already been forsaken. So Tracy said level the playing field. That's kind of the way I look at what's going on here, okay? We don't have time to discuss it for the entire class. I just want you to think about that as a possibility. Phyllis, did you want to say something? Well, and yes, and that's why I think this is here. I think it does. If my, and this is not my idea, this is what I have read actually a number of times. If this is what's playing out here, then the references that God makes to Jacob and Esau, for instance, in the book of Romans, that God loved Jacob and hated Esau as far as his plans for redemption, and that this shows God's work, that redemption came about as what God has done, just like giving children to barren women, that God is the active force in the bringing of redemption. These are not happenstances. These are not accidents, that God acted. Well, if Isaac's trying to thwart God, what happens in this chapter is in many ways providentially God stepping in and going, nope, I've decided how this is going to be and you're not going to change it. And I just find that very fascinating. And you do see that happen a number of times. So, with that way too long introduction in mind, okay, look at the rest. So the rest of this is pretty straightforward. Why would this be important to Esau? Well, Esau, if he's the favored child, again, would have all the wealth of the family, which is pretty significant as we have seen in Abraham and Isaac's life. Number two, who intervened in Isaac's plans? This is just the story itself. Rebekah does. Rebekah overhears what's going on, and so she determines to change things. Why is she going to change it? I think there's two reasons for this. Okay, if you give her the benefit of the doubt, it's because she recognized that God had said Jacob is going to be the greater. If you just look at it from a sibling rivalry, I'm a mama and this is my mama's boy, why does she do it? Yeah, because she liked him better than she liked Esau. I mean, after all, he's not coming in muddy and stinking every day and having to wash his clothes, okay? So think about it from two perspectives. Because it raises the possibility she's either acting out of God's best interests or she's simply acting out of Jacob's best interests. And either one of those is possible, okay? So that's the answer to the previous information. You know, she knows about the prophecy and each of them, Isaac and Rebekah, have a favorite child. Okay, so we get to number three. What's Jacob's concern when Rebekah says, here's what we'll do. You know, I recognize that your daddy loves Esau's food, but don't think I can't cook. I mean, this just makes total sense to me. Don't think I can't cook what he likes every bit as much as that boy can cook what he likes. So you go get a couple of kids, and I'll have it fixed up, or he'll never recognize that this is just goat meat. Okay, and so you know, Jacob's concern is what? Number three. Huh? Yeah, that he's going to get found out. It's interesting, the very end, in verse 12, Jacob's concern is voiced. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him. He was a deceiver to him. That's what's interesting about that statement. They are contemplating deception. He's only worried about getting caught. He's not worried about the deception itself. He's worried more about the plan than he is about the morality of what's going on. And this is, again, as you look at Isaac and Jacob, some things you see in them. I recognize that Abraham was deceptive, but less so in regards to Sarah, because they really were half-brother and sister. You know, he could pass that off and go, well, I wasn't lying completely. Isaac lies completely, and Jacob, man, that boy, he was really good at it. Okay, so he's concerned about getting caught, and he doesn't seem put out by the proposition or how we're going to go about doing it, just how we're going to get away with it. And I think that that's kind of interesting. And so what does Rebekah do? Yeah, she makes sure and fixes it. It's all right. I got that covered, Jacob. We'll just take the hides and we'll put them on your hands, and he'll feel. And you and I, we look at that and go, really? You can't? He couldn't tell the difference between goat hair and his son's the hair on his arm. We're not talking about the same kind of goats you and I typically deal with. Some of the goats that were raised in that part of the world, and this comes into play in Jacob's life later on, were long-haired, silky-haired, much softer hair than what we tend to think of. Black, beautiful. You see it in Song of Solomon, you know, when he compares his lover's hair to goat hair. I feel quite sure if I did that to Tracy, she wouldn't take too well to it. But for them, that was a beautiful thing. And so, you know, there's some practicality. Here's what's interesting to me about that. Rebekah has an answer for every objection and concern that Isaac's about to voice. Rebekah takes care of it, which tells you, yes, Jacob's the deceiver, but Mama's really the one running the show here, okay? And here again, I find this interesting. If he's 77 years old, she's got to be, we're never told how old she is. If she was very young when they married, say 15, okay? If she's 15, Then she's 35 when they are born. She's at least 75 when they marry. So we're talking about somebody between 75 and 100. If you give the other 37 years that people give to Isaac, then, you know, she's older than Sarah was. Even actually about the age Sarah was when she died, if all that plays out. And so, you know, here's a 77-year-old man whose mom, who's 100 or something or so, is telling him to do all this, and he's like, "Yes, Mama," you know. And there's things about this that just, they're crazy to me. And yet this is exactly what happens. What suspicions does Isaac voice? I counted 5 different things. So what did you get? What suspicions does Isaac voice? Okay, how'd you get this so fast? And interestingly enough, Jacob's deception is, yeah, God supplied it to me. Pay attention to that, because there seems to be good evidence that at this point, Jacob didn't consider himself allegiant to God, to Yahweh. Okay? When he leaves home in the next chapter, he's going to make a deal with God. If you'll take care of me when I leave, when I come back, I will serve you as my God. And so I think he's kind of throwing God's will around foolishly here. That's my perspective for what it's worth to you. Yes, ma'am.
The part that stood out to me, which made me laugh, is when he was like, "It was your son part. Here I am part." And he was like, "My son, who is it?"
Yes. Okay, that's the next thing, is that he asks point blank, who are you? Okay, and I think because he's there so quickly. All right? Anybody else? What else suspicion do we see voiced? Okay, yeah, now he says, okay, well, look, you sound a lot like Jacob to me. Now, he can't see, and my guess would be he probably is questioning his own hearing as well at this point. And so, who are you? And come here. Let me touch you, because your voice is not right to me. And so he does, and he feels the hides and concludes, okay, this is Esau. Anything else? Okay, he's going to mention later on the way he smells, but there's a couple of things happen before that. He asks him pointedly, that's right, in verse 24, "Are you really Esau?" You know, I mean, at this point, Jacob can't just dance around it. He either has to say yes or no. And so he says, "Yep, I'm really Esau." Okay, so we've gone from deceiver to out and out liar, and yet Isaac is unconvinced. Now, he does at this point accept the food, and he eats it, and he eats it without objection, which is kind of a curiosity to me. It's possible that this is another test. If this doesn't taste right, then I'm going to know it. And the reason I mention that is because his love for Esau's savory food is mentioned so many times. So it's pertinent to the story. And then what else happens? Then we get to the, okay, look, come here and give me a hug. Come give your daddy a hug. And he does that in order to smell his clothing. Okay, it doesn't sound like him, but it feels like him. He's got the food part down. He's told me repeatedly it's him. Isaac is unconvinced. That's what all of this says to me. And yet he runs out of ways to prove it. And so after he eats of his food and after he smells his garments, he pronounces this blessing. Okay, what's the essence of the blessing? Interestingly enough. And this is beginning in verse, verse 27. What's the essence of the blessing? Do what? Okay. Yeah, the essence of the blessing has to do with his temporal life. Okay, notice And he starts with, yes, you smell like the fields. And so that's kind of the start of it. In that regard, may God give you of the dew of the heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Now, he's looking to God, but essentially what he's asking is that God would bless him. And I want you to think about this. In the same way he had been blessed. Remember the 100-fold year that he had? That's just 1 year. And so, essentially, he is offering to Jacob the status that he enjoys before God. And that everything he has, the plenty of grain and wine. Don't you know, Isaac already had all that. So he is conveying his financial success, his earthly status upon this son. I don't want you to ever have to work for it. I don't want you to have to struggle for it. May God give you of the dew or from the dew of heaven and from the fatness of the earth. It is not the Abrahamic promise per se. Not at this point. He doesn't say, may in you all the nations of the earth would be blessed. May you have descendants like the sand of the seashore. Now, that's coming, but not at this point. This is more generic until you get to verse 29. And this sounds a whole lot like the prophecy of God. I personally wonder if Isaac is suspicious or if he is bound and determined to make sure Esau has the blessing that God specified would come upon Jacob. Because look at verse 21. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you, and be master over your brethren. What was the prophecy God gave to Rebekah? That Jacob would be the master over his brother. I mean, this is almost the same language, okay? And let your mother's sons bow down to you. So, clearly in his mind, his concern has something to do with the relationship between these two boys. Does that make sense to you? And as you read through it, that's why I'm more and more inclined to think what you see here is Isaac attempting to thwart God's plan. I know that God told us Jacob was going to be and I know he's already got the birthright, but I'm going to do everything I can to establish Esau. And then the one Abrahamic echo is in the end of verse 29. Cursed be everyone who curses you, blessed be everyone who blesses you. That does go back to the Abrahamic promise. But he does not convey exactly the same promise that God had conveyed upon him. I want you to think about that for a moment. Why not? Okay, well, all God has said is the elder is going to serve the younger. Who made the promise to Abraham? Who made the promise to Isaac? What would be the natural expectation in the next generation? That God's going to do the promising about that. And I do think that that's a credible consideration. You know, Isaac doesn't take upon himself to convey God's promise to Isaac. To Jacob or to Esau. He thinks it's Esau. He conveys the promise that he has control over. I can give you of my wealth, and I can ask of you that you receive what I have received from God. But the promise beyond that is really not his to pass on. I think that's an interesting thought. He is deceived. He does convey this promise, this blessing upon who he thinks to be Esau, even though it is Jacob. And Jacob goes out the door. Okay? It's very clear to me that either Rebekah is attempting and Jacob are attempting to accomplish God's will in their own way, or if not, if they're just doing this selfishly, God is using them providentially to make sure and accomplish His designs. Okay? In either case, what should be clear is Isaac and Esau's attempt to change things, God overrules. Okay, and I think that's the point. Who's in control? All through Genesis, who's in control? God's in control. What difference does that make to the children of Israel going into the land of Canaan? Yeah, I can have faith and go do what God tells me to do because God's in control. What difference should that make to us? Same. Doesn't really matter what happens in this life. Doesn't matter what happens to me personally. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters. God's in control. That's where I need to have my faith and my trust and my energy. God's in control. And so I think that's the message that goes on and on. Okay, number 6. As soon as Jacob goes out, what happens? Man, this is like a soap opera. I mean, he didn't get out of the tent before Esau comes. I'm sure in a different door. That's the way I see it. As soon as the tent closes, the camera turns, and here comes Esau. And he walks in and says, hey, I brought you what you wanted to eat. And Isaac's reply is, who is that other guy? I find Isaac's reaction interesting. The next question is, well, first of all, what's Esau's reaction? That was the first question I asked, even though we're told about Isaac's first. What's Esau's reaction? Yeah, exceedingly great and bitter cry. Interestingly enough, this is mentioned in Hebrews 12 as well. Esau and the birthright, selling it as a profane, worthless, insignificant thing. That's mentioned in Hebrews 12. And then the Hebrew writer also mentions that when Esau lost the blessing, he cried and moaned and groaned, and it didn't matter. He didn't get it back. So both of these incidents are mentioned in Hebrews chapter 12. Here's the curiosity. Look at verse 33. What's Isaac's reaction? What does it say? He trembled exceedingly. Why do you tremble exceedingly? Do what? You're either mad or you're scared. I don't see anger here. Do you? I mean, maybe that's the case. That may well be. That may well account for it. But I want you to consider the possibility of he's afraid. What would make him mad's pretty obvious. Jacob has deceived me. What would make him scared? I tried to do this one way, and God made sure it was done the other way, and I got caught with my hand in the cookie jar. And that's an interesting consideration to me, because the way he reacts, he says, where's the one who hunted the game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I haven't blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. At this point, Isaac does not try to change what he's already done. And I don't know how all those traditions go. I really don't. You can try to read opinions, but we really can't determine exactly how those traditions went. We do know that, for instance, the Babylonian kings or the Persian kings, if they made a decree and sealed it, even they couldn't change it. Now, they could go back and countermand, give another decree that in some way, but you see that in the story of Esther. You see it in Daniel, in the lion's den, okay? I don't know if this is one of those things that once it's been made, it can't be undone. But given that it's a patriarchal blessing, you would think that he could go back and say, oops, I've made a mistake. Go get Jacob. Bring him back in here. Let's straighten this thing out. At this point, he does not do that at all. Indeed, he shall be blessed. And Esau's reaction to this, cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, bless me. Don't you have a blessing for me? Jacob's replies, your brothers come with deceit. And Isaac's reply, your brothers come with deceit and taking away your blessing. And Esau, he's rightly named. First it was the birthright, now it's the blessing. Don't you have something for me? That's the end of verse 36. Isaac replies with, first of all, the reality. I made him your master, and I made him the master over all his brethren, and I've given him servants, and I've given him grain, and I've given him wine, I've given him all this. What do you want? What can I do for you? What is there left at this point? And Esau, once again, just one blessing. Just give me some kind of blessing. I would propose once again, this may well betray what they were trying to do. And Esau sees that this is going to be as bad as I was afraid it was going to be. I'm going to walk away from here with nothing. And so Isaac in verse 39 answers and says, and I want you to read this carefully, "Behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above." It's the same language in verse 28. It can be translated of the fatness or from the fatness. It's the same wording. But I want you to appreciate that there's two possible meanings here. You can either derive your benefit from the fatness of the earth, or you can live in exclusion from the fatness of the earth. Your living can be of in the sense of receiving, or it can be of in the sense of away from. And most of what I've read, and it makes sense to me, especially if you kind of look at this as Isaac trying to manipulate the circumstance, that rather than a real blessing, this is a kind of a curse. And if you look at the rest of it, he doesn't say plenty of grain and wine. What he says is your dwelling shall be, and I'm going to read it the way I think that it's intended, away from the fatness of the earth and away from the dew of heaven. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. It will come to pass when you become restless, you'll break his yoke from your neck. As we look at this story play out in the future, that's exactly what happens. Esau ends up living where? In Mount, what's biblically referred to as Mount Seir. And if you look on this map, you see Bethel, Kirjath Arba, and Sodom along the Dead Sea. You see that? There's nothing mentioned to the east of that, but immediately along the Dead Sea, from about the middle of the Dead Sea, from about where Kirjath Arba is mentioned, down, that area is Seir. It's called Mount Seir, the mountains of Seir, and it becomes known as Edom throughout the rest of the Bible. It's wilderness, it's rugged, there are some high pastures where you can grow things and have cattle and sheep. But for the most part, it's a rugged kind of wilderness. Lots of minerals, came from there. And that's part of the way the Edomites eventually would make their living is through trade and because of the natural resources there, but not because of their farming. Notice the prohibition that Isaac makes. Your dwelling is not going to be from the fatness of the land. Your dwelling is not going to come from the dew of heaven. You're going to live by your sword. And indeed, your brother's going to have domination over you. Okay? And so Esau's reaction is what? Yeah, takes it out on Jacob. He hates him and determines that as soon as his dad dies, he's going to kill him. Here's some irony for you too. If Isaac is 137, and he dies at 180, how many more years did he live? 43 years is a long time for Esau to wait to kill his brother. And I just can't help but wonder if God went, okay, you can make a promise like that if you want to, but you're going to have to hold on for a long time. Because we see that 20 years later, Esau's not bound and determined to kill him anymore. Okay? What happens if Isaac dies in 5 years? The whole Bible story might be a little different. Ken?
Is his hatred the yoke that's referred to?
Say again?
Is his hatred the yoke
That he's going to break? I hadn't thought about that, but that's a possibility. It certainly is. I think the more probable idea, of course, we understand a yoke is what burdens someone. What you see in the Bible story is that Israel, the nation of Israel, dominates Edom, but Edom repeatedly, at different times throughout history, rebels and wins their independence, and then Israel comes back again and defeats them, and Edom rebels and wins their independence, and that pattern goes on all the way up to Herod the Great, who is an Edomite, an Idumean, and yet when the Romans finally come, Israel as a nation more or less survives, but Edom doesn't. The Edomites are destroyed at that point. So there is a breaking of the yoke on and off throughout their history. To me, that makes the most sense of the prophecy, but you may be right. I hadn't really thought about it in the sense, and I haven't seen that anywhere, so that's a good thought, interesting consideration. Okay, we'll pick up the last part of this, beginning in verse 41 through the end, plays into chapter 28. So we'll pick up with those thoughts as we start the next chapter on Wednesday.